The auction house smelled of dust and broken dreams. Margaret Hayes stood on the wooden platform, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her worn dress. She was 26 years old, and today her own parents had brought her here like unwanted cattle. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the crowded room filled with ranchers and farmers looking for wives. Margaret had heard the whispers all her life. Barren, worthless, a curse upon any family. When the doctor confirmed she could never bear children, her parents saw no reason to keep feeding a mouth that would never produce grandchildren. Her mother had not even looked at her when they signed the papers. Her father had taken the money and walked away without a single word of goodbye. 26 years of being their daughter, and she was worth exactly 40. $7 to them. Men in the crowd examined her like they would examine a horse. Men in the crowd examined her like they would examine a horse. Some shook their heads when the auctioneer mentioned her condition. Others laughed cruelly. Margaret felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. One man in a fine suit approached the platform. He looked her up and down with cold eyes. Margaret's stomach turned with dread, but then he shook his head. Too thin, not strong enough for farm work. He walked away. The afternoon sun began to fade. The crowd thinned. Margaret remained on the platform, unwanted and unchosen. The auctioneer was about to announce that she would be sent to the workhouse when the doors of the auction house creaked open. A tall man walked in, covered in trail dust from head to toe. His boots were worn, his hat had seen better days, and his face carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Behind him, 5 small faces peered around the doorframe with curious eyes. The man approached the platform slowly. He did not examine Margaret like the others had. Instead, he simply looked into her eyes. "I am Thomas Walker," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "I have a ranch in Cedar Valley. My wife passed away 2 winters ago, leaving me with 5 children." He paused, removing his hat respectfully. "I am not looking for someone to give me more children. I am looking for someone to help me love the ones I already have." Margaret's heart, which had been frozen with fear and shame all day, suddenly felt a warmth she had not experienced in years. "They told me about your condition," Thomas continued quietly, so only she could hear. "But I do not see a barren woman standing before me. I see a woman with a heart full of love that has nowhere to go. My children need that love, miss, and honestly, so do I." Margaret looked past him at the 5 children still hovering near the door. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12, held the hand of the youngest, a boy who could not have been more than 3. Their clothes were clean, but mended many times. Their faces showed the unmistakable signs of children who had learned too young what loss meant. The auctioneer quoted a price. Thomas paid it without bargaining, treating the transaction with quiet dignity rather than the cold commerce it truly was. Then he offered Margaret his hand to help her down from the platform. The journey to Cedar Valley took 3 days by wagon. Margaret learned the children's names during that journey. Sarah was 12 and had taken over running the household after her mother died. William was 10 and tried so hard to be the man of the family that he had forgotten how to be a boy. Emma was 8 and spoke very little since losing her mother. James was 6 and asked questions constantly about everything under the sun. And little Daniel, only 3, still sometimes called for his mama in his sleep. Thomas told Margaret about his wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, Elizabeth, she was the sunshine of our home, he said without bitterness or self-pity. When she died, the light went out. I have tried my best, but children need more than just food and shelter. They need warmth. They need someone to notice when they are sad and celebrate when they are happy. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Margaret understood why Thomas called it home. despite all his grief. The house was simple, but well built, surrounded by endless fields of golden grass that swayed in the evening breeze. A creek ran behind the property, catching the last light of sunset like liquid gold. The first weeks were difficult. Sarah viewed Margaret with suspicion, protecting her siblings from another potential loss. William tested her constantly, misbehaving to see if she would leave. Emma watched her with hollow eyes, saying nothing. James asked her repeatedly if she was going to die too. And Daniel cried for his mother every night. Margaret did not try to replace Elizabeth. Instead, she simply showed up day after day, with patience and steadiness. She learned that Sarah loved to read, but had no books. She discovered that William had a gift for working with horses. She noticed that Emma drew beautiful pictures in the dirt with sticks. She answered every one of James's endless questions, and she held Daniel through his nightmares, singing softly until he fell back asleep. Months passed. The house that had been merely surviving began to live again. Margaret taught the children songs while they did chores. She created traditions where there had been only routines. She made birthdays special again, holidays joyful again, ordinary days meaningful again. One evening, Thomas found Margaret sitting on the porch, watching the children play in the yard. Sarah was teaching Daniel to catch fireflies. William and Emma were laughing about something James had said. "Elizabeth would have loved you," Thomas said quietly, sitting beside her. Margaret shook her head. "I am not trying to be her." "I know," Thomas replied. "You are being yourself, and that is exactly what this family needed." The following spring, something happened that Margaret never expected. Sarah came to her with tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from a 13-year-old's confusion about growing up. And she came to Margaret not because she had forgotten her mother, but because she had forgotten her mother, but because she had found another woman worthy of her trust. One morning, still half asleep, he reached for Margaret and whispered the word she never thought she would hear directed at her: "Mama." Margaret wept, not tears of sorrow for the children she would never bear from her own body, but tears of overwhelming joy for the 5 children who had chosen her to be their mother. Her parents had called her barren because she could not create life. But standing in that kitchen, surrounded by 5 children who had blossomed under her care, Margaret finally understood the truth. She was not barren. She had never been barren. She had never been barren. She was simply waiting for the right garden to tend. And in Cedar Valley, in a simple ranch house filled with laughter and love, Margaret Hayes finally bloomed.